Okay, so yesterday we discussed in Western Europe, right, kind of the reconfiguring of that general region as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire. You had lack of stability, the lack of the law and order that the Roman Empire provided up through 400 or so, and then you kind of fall into disarray. You have the dwindling of cities. But you had the disruption of trade. You had people migrating off into rural areas, so the region became more spread out, less condensed into cities, which means communication is more difficult. Economic activity becomes a little bit sparse because of lack of trade, things of that sort. And what really kind of naturally, organically develops is a system, what was referred to as feudalism. What we call feudalism at that time. Obviously, historians look back at it, and it's based on the concept of dividing up land, right? So it's a system where people are no longer relying on the establishment, the government, the church, whatever it might be, for let's get that. They are now relying on local, referred to as lords, for their protection, because there isn't the Roman Empire there anymore. There's nobody there to provide that law and order in that that system. So if you look at the screen here, you can see it starts off with the king, right? I mean, he's at top of this community that have developed, and under them they're called nobles, right? These are like the aristocrats. These are the people that are relatively wealthy and somewhat connected to the leadership. And in return for protection that the king provides for them, the king gives them land, right, to live on. And then in return for that, the nobles will then provide a certain amount of money, and they'll provide protection for the king through the use of what we call knights, right? And then you kind of fall further down the chain there, and you can see that under nobles you have knights and you have what we call vassals. And again, the nobles would take their land and they would allow these vassals to live on it. And again, it's kind of that protection thing. And it goes all the way down to the peasant class, which is the majority of the population. The peasants are given land to live on, and their return for that is labor. Like they are the ones who farm the lands, who cultivate all the crops and so forth. And so there's that type of a relationship that formed, and as I said, it formed kind of naturally or organically because of the fact that normally all those things would be provided by a central government, a central figure. And because of the Roman Empire not being there anymore, this is what comes about. Okay. You can see there the picture there. You have a person there who's standing up. He kind of represents like a higher up, maybe he's a noble. And the people working in the fields there, kind of bending over, those are your peasant class. And that's kind of how the system came up. It was a social, economic, and political system that dominated the Middle Ages. And that's basically what happened. Now, this is only a Western European thing, although you could argue it also happened in Japan, but they're not really connected. The Byzantine Empire is still much, very successful and thriving. Middle Eastern communities, are doing the same. Trade is active. There's a lot of culture, a lot of knowledge being, possessed in that region. Obviously in China, you have a very established community as well. But here in Western Europe, you have this system that developed, which was a regression, right? We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Regressed in terms of knowledge, in terms of culture development, obviously trade, things that we talked about yesterday. It was loosely organized. It wasn't like a specific system, right? Not every kingdom was the same size. Not every king ruled in the same manner. There was not any uniformity. It was all kind of differently, so loosely organized. And powerful lords were kind of the most powerful of all. Like they had the most power, even though technically the king was at the height of this pyramid that you kind of saw in the previous slide. But the lords who served under him were like they had the most day-to-day connection to the peasantry, the serfs, if you want to call them that. And basically it was an agreement, right? And it was almost like slavery to a certain extent, because the peasants who worked the land, they were not allowed to leave. Now they weren't owned like a slave would be owned as property, but they were pretty much tied to the land, very similar to the sharecroppers in the United States South right after the Civil War ended and slavery was ended and so forth. Kind of the same type of situation. As I said, the system was there to provide protection for the population. The lords and the kings who ruled above, they were willing to provide that protection because the peasants did all the work. And if those peasants weren't there, then they had to find some other way to provide to get labor. So there was a certain amount of value that each had for the other, as you go through this process, right? You can see here the picture that's probably a noble or a knight. He's on a horse and he's collecting a certain amount of tribute, if you want to call it that. It looks like a bag of money. It could have been anything. It could have been any commodity that person with his head down with a little hood on. He would be considered like a serf or a peasant, and he's given the Lord his stuff. And that was what it was called. It was called a lord. A lot of times you see those old movies, they'll say, "Yes, my lord." That's where that comes from. Okay. And it was basically a contract that each had with the other. And you can see there's a document there that has a document that would be that contract. So there was a feudal contract. That's why these peasants couldn't leave, because they had a certain amount of responsibilities that they had to make sure that they were accomplishing. Now the fief there, the term fief basically is an area of land. All right. And that was a land that was given to the peasant to live on and to farm. Although it was owned by the lord above or the king ultimately, but the peasant was allowed to live on that land. It's very similar. You think of it kind of, again, we use a school analogy. Like the classroom here would be like I would be the lord. The classroom would be my manor, and all these little desks that you stay to work at, that's your little fief. It's not yours. You don't own it. But every day you come here and you do your work, all right? That's kind of how we're set up. Obviously, it's a lot more, complex than what that was, but you get the idea. It included alien villages, peasants, anything that who needed protection from, Germanic tribes, barbarians. A little later on, the Vikings come from the north. These were all things that were really based on a loyalty thing. Right, they were loyal to the person above you who is that vassal that is under your control, and so that was huge. That loyalty piece is a big part of this. Not only was it was a legal document, but there was a kind of an agreement. But it was also, that person's protecting me, he's giving me a place to live. I'm going to be loyal to that individual. So like I said about that big, large. Remember we talked about the Holy Roman Empire with all those different colors on the map of different areas. Those would be referred to as maybe a manor or a kingdom. And the manor is usually a larger area of land that multiple peasants might live on. Who knows what that number might say. So peasants, they also be referred to as serfs in some areas. They made up the majority of society. When we talk about that, that's not uncommon to this time period or this area. Whatever region you're talking about, typically the working class, the peasants, or whatever you want to call them, make up the majority in society. They mentioned before they were not slaves by definition. However, they were basically tied to their land based on the contract that they signed with their above lord or above vassal. And the lord then had his same type of agreement with the king over him. So that kind of works as you saw the first slide with that triangle where they each had kind of a responsibility to the person below them, but also the person at the lowest had a responsibility to the person above them. So it's kind of that, you know, give and take type of relationship. Conflicts came about often anytime you have land ownership, you have conflicts over, you know, whose land is what land. And like, you know, if you think of it this way, and it always happens in the first couple of weeks of school, you come in and you settle your specific desk that you want to sit at for whatever reasons. And then, you know, you're sitting there for, you know, the first week and a half of school, and then you come in someday and someone new comes into the classroom and they sit in your desk. And you kind of like get offended by that. Like you're in my desk. Well, we know that's not your desk. It's your place, right? That's where you're comfortable. Kind of that human nature to do that, right? Well, that happened often in these type of situations where there was some feuds over certain parts of the contract or the land, and the lords would settle. That's where the term feudalism comes from. Sometimes the feud that people had, and you know, amongst themselves over where they lived and who had what, and so forth. Because there's not like, you know, high-tech surveying going on where they had property lines established. It was kind of a, you know, loosely organized. Is this my land? Is this your land? You know, type of thing. As peasants, as time goes on, the peasants began to develop specific skills. Maybe they were producing more product than what their vassal had required, and whatever that surplus was, they could sell that and make a little bit of money on the side, you know, type of thing. Or they might have developed some kind of specific skill. Maybe they were, skilled at making pottery pots, or they were skilled at basket weaving or whatever. And they could use that as a kind of a side gig to generate extra income. And once they got to a point where that income got to a certain point, they could buy themselves out of their feudal contract and move up in the social ladder type of thing, right? So it's not like a caste system like you saw in India, where you were born in that system and you stayed there. There was an amount of social mobility that you could attribute to, but you had to be able to pay for it, right? Well,
I just heard from you.
Yeah.
Just wanted to see a little history.
All right. So finishing up here, there's, you know, you see the knight there. You guys know the video games that have all those nice things. And there was a kind of an honor system that was kind of that. Back we talked about how you had a certain amount of loyalty. That was kind of that feudal contract. Well, the knights were the ones who were the kind of the big players in terms of providing protection. And as time wore on, there was a certain amount of honor that was attributed to those individuals. Like they did things a certain way, right? They had integrity, they were honest, you know, they were devoted, that type of thing. And it was kind of referred to as the code of chivalry. And that was where everybody kind of said, hey, I am a person who is a knight, and I have a certain responsibility. There's a certain expectation that is that people have on me, and I got to make sure I kind of, you know, I'm loyal to that responsibility. And that's where that kind of system kind of comes from. Okay, so I told you it was real quick. I just wanted to cover that. We kind of referred to this yesterday a little bit. So as we move forward, you have your video lesson that you are working on. That video lesson I think is due tonight, because we're going to go over it in class tomorrow. It looks like it's a lot. It's like a 40-minute video. You don't have to watch the entire video. You skip around a little bit, as it says. There's only like 16 questions. Some kids already have it done. We're working on it yesterday. So try and get that done in the remaining time. You got a good, over a half an hour today. Whatever you can get done tonight, we'll work on it in class. So whatever, you get done before class tomorrow, what you'll get credited for. All right. And then we'll move on from there. Questions on that? All right. Rest of the time is yours. Work on your video lessons. If you don't have headphones to listen, you can go in the hallway, but I only can let 2 people out because they're really going to be obviously super sensitive to people being in the hallway today. So hopefully you have headphones and that'll take care of that.
Is it going to be like a ferment analysis?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.